Good evening. So tonight we finish up a little bit of our history books. We ended with Second Chronicles. If you look at the book of Second Chronicles, the very last chapter is Cyrus's edict, King Cyrus's edict rather, and that Cyrus allows the reader some great hope, possibly going back into the land, eyes wide open for the Davidic king to come. And Ezra opens up with the same exact decree to go back into the land, build the house of God, build the temple. Temple building was a big deal in the ancient world. It meant that that in fact the God would come and dwell in these places, and so to rebuild the temple is a really, really big deal. Cyrus, this great Persian king, allowed this to happen. The community then heads back in the beginning of Ezra, and from Ezra chapter 1 all the way through number 7, you get this attempt to rebuild the house of God. They bump into everything from racial issues with regard to the people that remained back in the land they were exiled from, to political issues, groups of people that want to help, maybe good reasons, maybe not so good reasons, and then end up writing letters to Cyrus and thwarting the building program. Ezra and the people of God eventually returned. There's three major people that you want to remember in the return. There's Zerubbabel, who rebuilds the temple. There's Ezra, who rebuilds the people. He's the priest. And there's Nehemiah, who rebuilds the wall. And those guys are really important. You remember in the 1980s, where everybody was kind of tuned into a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Really weird book, probably for some of you, but Zen, Z-E-N, Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Those are the three big names for the return. And in the midst of this return, you've got the story about Nehemiah that opens up in his first chapter. And Nehemiah is a cupbearer to the king, a very powerful guy, and just collapses in weeping upon hearing that, in fact, the walls, remember, Nehemiah is building the walls, Ezra and Zerubbabel are already there, and he's crushed to hear that the walls are still not built, and they're still crumbled. And so he begs the king to go back, and the king releases him to go back, and Nehemiah heads back to rebuild the walls. The goal, of course, is reached, and the community celebrates the completion of the house of God according to the Torah in Nehemiah 7. But there's something that simply isn't seemingly there for the returnees, and that is the presence of God. A temple without a deity in the temple is just simply a really fancy building in the ancient Near East. A temple had to have a deity in it for it to be a temple. A building with a deity in it was a temple, and a temple without a deity in it was really not. And so it's interesting here at the end of Ezra and Nehemiah, at the end of their time, they do have a temple, but they don't seem to have the deity in it. This is primarily because of something that God prophesied through the prophet Ezekiel several hundred years before, but we'll get to that in a few. Lastly, the book of Esther. Esther is an amazing story in the same kind of way that Ruth sort of intrudes upon the historiography between Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. Esther puts a cherry on top of this exilic writing from 1st Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Esther's this great story of the exile, and interestingly enough, God's never mentioned in the book, never mentioned in this book, never mentioned in the Song of Songs. And in this book, though, God, one writer I remember wrote that while God's never mentioned, God lies everywhere just underneath the surface, and it's true. The story is fantastic. There was this great feast that King Artaxerxes threw, and Xerxes called for his wife Vashti. He would have had a trophy wife like any good king. She would have probably been very bright. She would have probably been able to speak multiple languages, and she was going to be very good looking. And so those kinds of things were things that probably characterized Vashti. What they weren't supposed to be was too terribly strong-willed, and so he called Vashti to show her off. She did not like that idea, and in fact immediately said no. She was apparently someone that he really liked one way or the other, because he didn't kill her. He deposed her, and then looked for another queen, and he ended up with Esther, and he made Esther's a Jewish girl, and made Esther the queen. Esther's clearly gorgeous, and has um, uh, won Xerxes' heart, and in the process of marrying her, multiple feasts and parties are thrown on behalf of Esther. And in the midst of that, her cousin Mordecai discovers a plot to kill the king and exposes it. And in fact, is kind of heralded a hero. He saved the king. The king has a right-hand man named Haman, and Haman is a chief courtier in the king's service. And Haman goes about into the city and demands that people bow down to him. Mordecai, Esther's relative, won't bow down to him, and it drives him bananas. And so he decides that he is going to get Mordecai, and so he, in fact, begins by deciding that he's going to throw Mordecai's entire race, the Jews, underneath the bus. He goes to the king and says that these people are subversive and factitious, and they need to be dealt with. And so he gets the king to sign an ordinance that will, in fact, do this. Well, there's limited time between the time that this is signed and the time this is about to go into play, and Esther is the only one that can stop it. Now, Haman has no idea that Esther is a Jew. And so, and of course, all he's doing this for is because he wants to kill Mordecai. But he doesn't care. He's a very cruel guy and willing to wipe out an entire race just to kill this one guy that somehow or another is not giving him his due. Esther, at this point, is in a very sticky predicament. Mordecai encourages her to approach the king, and she does. And as she does, and when she does, she exposes Haman for what he's doing, for what a crooked and cruel guy is. And Haman, not Mordecai, ends up being killed. The beauty of this story is that it engineers, if you will, the Feast of Purim. The king releases the edict on the Jews. They're saved. They're released, and this Feast of Purim that celebrates their liberation and their freedom and their safety is instituted. And the book, in fact, is a celebration of this. So it really fits quite well on the end of the histories. If, in fact, Chronicles ends with eyes wide open with great hope that, in fact, there would be a new Davidic king to come, and there'd be entry into the land and the rebuilding of the temple. Ezra and Nehemiah end with a rebuilt temple, kind of rebuilding the people, rebuilt walls. Then the celebration of Purim says that in exile we can look forward that God himself, even while we're in exile, is working among us, and we can trust that God one day will work and we will be back in the land and God will be among us. And that is a wonderful and redemptive hope that you find in the book of Esther.